Okay, so I just saw the Saddam Hussein versus Pol Pot episode, and I'm gonna give my thoughts on it. So, first off, I want to make note that this is the controversial episode of this season because they're doing a thing where each season they're gonna have a controversial episode. Like season one, it was IRA versus Taliban. Second season, it was Somali pirates versus Medellin cartel. And what makes this different from the other two, I mean, it's still a little, it still has that bad taste of like this kind of episode would produce. But for once, there's a sense that the producers did not want to have any sense of romanticizing about what these two guys did. Like in IRA versus Taliban, you can sense a little bit of romanticism between about the IRA, how like the guy kept saying that no one can defeat the IRA, they're fighting for their freedom. It makes them look good. I mean, they still address how horrible their actions were, but they didn't address them as they addressed them like as if they were heroic. And for Somali pirates versus Medellin cartel, you can kind of tell that there was a sort of reverence to to like Somalia and like how they have all these like how they have all this firepower. I mean, you like at one point in that episode, Joff Demoon said he wanted to go to Somalia. Um, so I actually like this controversial episode. I mean, I don't like the content, but I like how they're really setting the tone that there's no sense of love for these guys. Now, getting onto the actual episode, this episode was uh okay, let me break it down in parts. So, um in this episode, we have, for the first time, I believe, expert who may have actually known the person that they're representing. Like, one of them is a former Iraqi army general, and Saddam Hussein had him arrested for disobeying an order, and so this is actually kind of unique because this, besides him being the first one to actually have known to may have known this person, he's also the first expert to not speak English in the show. I mean, like, there are some experts who are, like, they sometimes say some things in other languages. Like, he doesn't say anything in English in this whole episode, so that was kind of unique. He's also there was another expert on the Pol Pot team this time, where he was a survivor of the genocide, and he told a really horrific story uh, at some point in the episode where he mentioned he was held captive by 12 and 13-year-olds with RPDs. Uh, This is the um so even though they are representing these men, that you can tell that they're not revering him at all. You can really tell that um there's no sense of love for these guys. Like, they're not like Scotty Collins, like constantly saying they're fighting for for their people's rights or whatever. Like, they're telling straight up how much they hated these guys. So, moving on. Um, the rest of the episode. Before I get into the tests, there's some other things to note. There's no tactics test in this episode, which kind of disappointed me because I like it when they examine tactics. So I don't really think they could have really put in anything, but maybe they could have. For Pol Pot, I would have said when they took over Cambodia, but like when they did the coup. But for Saddam, I don't know. I don't really. I'm not very good in that kind of history, so I don't know. I would have liked to see a tactics test. I mean, they did one for the North Korean episode. They didn't show it in the actual episode, but they do they actually do tactics comparisons for modern warriors. So it was kind of disappointing to not see one here. Maybe they'll show it online. And also, this was, I think, the first time was in there probably was before, but this is the first time they actually showed they had a mistake on the show, because there were the the blown up body parts, you know, when after they're, you know, they're done shooting it up, like a bunch of bees came in and started swarming it. So that was kind of weird. Anything else to note? No, that's about it. So I'm gonna go into the actual test. So, in the actual test, this is the first time they actually tested 3 of the 4 weapons in one test. Like they wanted to test how each weapon would do in like a series of waves. Like first wave they would throw the grenade. Second wave they would take out targets with the light machine guns. Third test they would come close quarters with the handguns. And they didn't really need to do that, actually. Like you could, like maybe they probably did it just because they're running out of ideas for tests, because the results that they came up with for why they gave the edges, they could have just done in a single test, like the Chinese stick grenade and RGD5, which is the 3rd instance that RGD5's been here. They gave the edge to the stick grenade. The RGD5 has no love, so they gave the edge to the stick grenade mainly because when you throw it, it's not gonna roll around, and it packs more of a punch. And they didn't need. I'll get to that in the end. For the RPD and RPK tests, they didn't actually use the results they got from the 3 weapon test. They actually did another test. So, having the light machine gun test the first time around was kind of pointless, and the 3rd test was just basically a handgun shootout, like shoot the targets with the handguns. So they could have done it all separately, but you know, just for ratings and viewers, they had it all in one time. So yeah, I mean, the first test to me is kind of funny because of how complicated it was. They didn't really need to go through all that. Anything else? The on the edges that they gave, I agree with the stick grenade, and I agree with the cane knife. I mean, for once they actually gave the edge to the smaller weapon, like they actually said the combat knife is a lot more flexible. Like you can move around more with the knife, whereas the cane knife, it's like it's too big, so you can't move around with it too much. Which reminds me of that Jesse James episode where it was actually the total opposite, where the bigger knife was actually better than the smaller knife. But that's a totally different other story. So I agree kind of with the cane knife, and for the RPD RPK assessment, that one they had problems agreeing on, but in the end they said they would rather have the gun with the bigger mag. You know, like the RPD has 100 rounds, RPK has I think 40 in each magazine. So I guess that works actually, and they said the same thing for the handgun. So the edges, the reason why they gave edges, I actually agree on why they gave the edges, because for once it's not based on time limit or who got the best time. They actually had some reasonable reasonable answers. So, and let's see. After that they came the X Factor evaluation, and the X Factor evaluation, I don't really have that much to say. They gave the edge to Pol Pot for initiative and killing instinct, and they gave Saddam Hussein the training, the psychological health, and a third one. I don't remember what the third one was, but I agree, sort of. And Pol Pot currently has the record for the lowest rating anyone's ever gotten, which is 27 for psychological. But he didn't really, Saddam Hussein didn't really beat him, because Saddam got like 46, because, you know, they were psychopaths. But Pol Pot was crazier, because his plan, you know, he wanted to change Cambodia in his image. So yeah. Not much to really comment on the X factors. I agree with a lot with what they say, so I'm gonna move on to the final thing. The running simulation, I don't think it's longer than CIA versus KGB, but it is pretty long, and it's actually one of the better simulations I've actually seen because it actually makes you guess who's gonna win, and also there's a lot of like cool spots in there. Like it starts out with Saddam Hussein in his like palace, and it actually makes sense that Pol Pot would be the invader and Saddam Hussein would be the defender because when you think about it, this is actually a good matchup if you are actually trying to think of dictators. Saddam Hussein, who puts down rebellions, and Pol Pot, who's one of the greatest rebel leaders of all time, even though he's one of the worst men of all time. But he did lead an effective rebellion. So these two were actually a good matchup. So in the simulation, Saddam Hussein is Pol Pot is the offender and Saddam is the defender, and it starts out with Pol Pot throwing his grenade and they go into a shootout, and then I didn't expect this, but Saddam Hussein enters a limousine and tries to drive away. I didn't expect that, and afterwards the Khmer Rouge managed to get Saddam Hussein out of the car, and Saddam was still running while his men are shooting back, and eventually it's down to one man. And this ending actually kind of surprised me because usually when it's down to last wars they have the close range battle, and there was no close range battle here. Here Pol Pot got tricked because he enters a room. Okay, this is spoilers. I know I should have mentioned spoilers a long time before, but this one was surprising. He comes into the room, and he has his K-knife out, and he sees like this person by the hallway, and he comes in and enters the room and knifes him. It turns out to be a Republican guard who's tied up, and Saddam Hussein comes on to his like side, puts his handgun to his head, and shoots him. And it says Allahu Akbar at the end. So no climactic like duel to the death. He got tricked. I don't remember the last time that has actually happened in this episode, in any Deadliest Warrior episode, like where the warrior got tricked. Like maybe if I look back, or maybe if I think harder enough, I'll think of something. But I was expecting a duel to death, so it was different for once. And this was actually an entertaining simulation to watch. So yeah, so final thoughts. Okay, let me get this straight. Let me set this straight. I don't like it when they do controversial episodes, because it stirs up a lot of trouble, and it brings to light some people that should not be on TV for things that they've done to innocent people, or just people in general. But as an episode on its own, just for entertainment value and for educational value, because you're actually learning what these guys did, so it's not a bad episode. I mean, like, if you're if you're willing to ignore the cartoonish kind of aspect of this, where you're having two of the world's deadliest dictators like fight each other, if you're just watching the show just for the entertainment value, I mean, like, it's I'm conflicted myself, so I guess just watch this episode. But if you have a little problem with these kinds of like controversial topics, I wouldn't suggest watching it. But this episode does maintain a tone where it's not praising what they've done, so that's something I actually like.